I'm just letting everybody know that as soon as we get started, I'm going to go dark for a little bit while I finish up my meal and listen to the staff reports.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a quick sound check.
You sounded a little bit doubled. There's an echo.
Okay, team, how about sound check now? This is very exciting. Hector and we were in the same room for the first time, trying to test out our viewing station, but still a little sound echo going on.
I'm just giving Council Postizo a moment. We haven't heard from him, have we?
I talked to him today. He had a slight time conflict that he was going to try to rush to get here in time, but he may be a few minutes late and said that he will join when he can.
All right, well, I'll give him a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Jordan, do you know if there's any speaker request forms?
We have 2 speaker request forms for our agenda item today.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So at this time, 5:33, we'll call the Talent City Council special meeting to order of August 16th. Roll call, please.
Councilor Clark,
Here.
Councilor Panemarov,
Here.
Councilor Greider.
Here.
Councilor Pastizo. Councilor Pastizo is not present. Councilor Byers,
Here.
Councilor Parra Miller,
Here.
and Mayor Ayers Flood.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Hector. The next item on the agenda is 2.1, opportunity to interpret meeting into Spanish. Hector?
And this is a question for the public. If any attendees would like this meeting translated into Spanish, we'd ask that they raise their hand now. Y una pregunta para público, si alguien necesitará esta reunión interpretada en español, por favor, hace su mano hoy, and I'll watch the attendees, Mayor.
Thank you, Hector. And for the audience, again, I just said a few minutes ago, I'm finishing up a meal and I'm going to leave my video off until I'm done. And then I'll join you by video. It's a little earlier than usual meeting. So with that, the next item on the agenda is additions and corrections to the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda, staff or council? All right, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is speakers heard on non-agenda item. Hector, do you have any request forms for speakers heard on non-agenda item?
Mayor, we have not received any speakers for tonight's meeting on non-agenda items.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. 5.1, discussion of the taxing district recommendations for proposed urban renewal plan. Staff report?
Right, thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna go ahead and start a slideshow for you all. And apologies ahead of time, I'm working off my laptop tonight as we try out some new tech solutions here. All right, can you all see a slideshow in front of you? Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I want to, before we get started, say thank you to Elaine Howard and David Dowman for being in the room with us tonight to also help answer any questions that council may have on this agenda item. But I will dive right into our review of written recommendations. So as a reminder to City Council, as well as the folks in the audience tonight, Council is currently under the review process and considering an urban renewal plan to help with our rebuild post Alameda fire. You know, this process started really back in August and October, where the urban renewal agency that currently exists conducted a feasibility study, drafted a plan, and forwarded that plan for public review. So that plan that the urban renewal agency drafted has been in the public review period, also called the consult and confer period, with all of the taxing districts that are impacted by this plan, including the City of Talent. I was able to present my understanding of the impacts on the city's financials from this plan on the 3rd. And that 45-day consult and confer period closed on Sunday. And so before you all is the written feedback that we received from taxing districts for us to discuss and review tonight. Tomorrow, we will host a public hearing as well to get direct community feedback on the proposed plan. And at the moment, we now also have the final vote on a potential ordinance to adopt the plan scheduled for August 24th. And really what I like to think about this, if you all can see my mouse, you know, the beginning is the drafting of the plan, and then it's the review period. We're now at the point where we're ending that review period and we're entering into the amending period where we can make changes based on feedback we received. And then ultimately it'll come before council for that final vote and decision. Any questions on process or where we are within it? Cool. So before I go into our presentation and conversation today, I just want to be really clear on definitions, since urban renewal can get to be technical language, and we're seeing some different use of different terms. So I want to be very clear on the difference between effective date and freeze date. So the effective date of an urban renewal plan is when the plan goes into effect. So typically that's 30 days after an ordinance is adopted by a council, or if the decision is placed on the ballot, after it's been certified by the county elections office that the plan was approved. So the effective date is when it starts and when it's effective. The freeze date, you know, is the year that the tax base is frozen. So the freeze date is the year that the tax base is frozen for all the taxing districts to collect property taxes on until the urban renewal ends, till the urban renewal agency ends. So the freeze date is influenced by the effective date, because the freeze date can't be prior to the effective date, for example. So I want to make that delineation clear. Any questions between the difference between effective date and freeze date for the purposes of this conversation? I'm not seeing more confused faces, so that's always a good sign. Okay. I will say, just for those in the audience tonight who aren't familiar with the plan, tomorrow night we will be going into a more in-depth presentation on the contents. Tonight is specific to the feedback that we received from other jurisdictions on the plan itself. And so I'm showing up here on the slide for you all is a summary of the type of feedback that we received from impacted districts. We did receive written feedback from 6 different impacted districts: City of Phoenix, the Library District, Jackson County, the Extension Services Rogue Valley Transportation District, and Jackson County Fire District 5. And largely the input from these districts fell into these kind of 5 broader categories. You know, the broad category of do not adopt the current plan as it's proposed, delay the frozen base, which would change the amount of tax that these impacted taxing districts would have to give up, amending the boundary, so we can change the boundary of the urban renewal, amending the projects, so we can add or take away projects that are listed in the plan, and then pass through. Pass through was a request by Jackson County Fire District 5, I believe, to pass through any revenue loss back to them. It is in gray because I am unsure, and that, you know, working with our consultant, there is no precedent for having done this before, and it would have to take a legal analysis and better understanding of what is or is not possible. From the research we were able to do, we have not seen this before. Yeah, Councilor Panamarev?
Yeah, is that something that is done routinely in other states, like California, for example?
You know, I'm going to hand that one off to Elaine or David if you want to chime in.
Hi, can people hear me? Okay, great. I guess, thank you for having me tonight. I know I have not met, I don't believe any of you before. Jordan and I have worked on this issue. It's nice to see you. I'm not sure, Councilor, that's a fair question. Urban renewal, as you might suspect, is one of these tools that many states use, but every state has a different statutory scheme. So I'm not sure if that type of pass-through has been used, in California, other places. In Oregon anyway, on the plans that I've worked with, I haven't seen that before. The statute doesn't speak to it. As Jordan said, that's something that if the council were interested, we'd want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into. Just broadly speaking, my concern would be, if the city were to do that for one taxing authority or taxing entity, we'd need to sort of articulate, why, what the good reason is, I guess I would say, that we're having that pass through for one entity and not for any others. That would be my biggest concern off the bat.
So just to clarify, I mean, the basis of my question is, I've never heard of that in Oregon. I think I've heard of it in California. I'm just wondering if this was a suggestion made with without much familiarity with Oregon law. That's the way it struck me.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the level of familiarity with respect to the comment, but to my knowledge, it's not something that I'm familiar with. So again, I just think if that were of interest, ultimately, that we would just want to essentially do more research on it. But my gut tells me that that's a route that, at the very least, the council would have to have, the city would have to have basically a good justification as to why it's going to say this district is essentially held harmless while other taxing authorities, bear the brunt of the frozen base.
Thank you.
My question is, did I understand you correct that there is no provision for that in the Oregon statute?
Sorry, trouble unmuting there. That's correct. I'm not aware of a provision that would say that's under the statute allowed.
Now my turn with the mute button. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for those questions. So what I want to walk council through is kind of the decisions that we can make around these recommendations before we dive into any specific recommendations. So there's kind of, oh, pardon me, two potential pathways, that we can take when addressing these recommendations. And those pathways are an ordinance or a resolution. So I want to be clear is that what the ordinance does is the ordinance is the tool that puts the plan into effect. It gets that effective date going. A resolution is really a declaration of intent that gives me and my staff guidance on the type of ordinance to bring before you. And would be the pathway to take if we want to pass an ordinance after the August 24th date. The pros of the ordinance route by August 24th is that sticks to the timeline that was set. That allows us to move the plan forward as proposed. We can still do small amendments to the boundary before that date. We can do small amendments to the projects. And I've included refer to the ballot on here, even though it wasn't a written recommendation from any taxing districts, because this has come up a lot in conversations that I've been having with the mayor in our leadership check-in, wanting to have all options on the table before council as you all decide which route you want to take when it comes to either adapting the plan or adopting it. So what a resolution allows us to do really is if the council decides the direction that we want to do is to delay the frozen base, what we need to do is we need to wait for the tax numbers to come out in October. That'll give us an accurate numbers of which that frozen base will be, and we can more accurately share with other taxing districts and understand potential financial impacts, as well as adjust what our project estimates are if it changes our maximum indebtedness. Once again, with resolution, we can still amend boundary, amend projects, or refer to the ballot. So what I really will be looking for from council tonight is some general direction around if you all would like to take the pathway of having an ordinance to consider, both tomorrow night as well as August 24th, or having a resolution to consider on August 17th or August 24th. And I'm happy to, do a little more explanation. That was kind of the quick description of the difference between the two, and I'm happy to dive in.
Questions or comments from council? Council Padomarav?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious about whether we could decide to delay the frozen base and but move ahead immediately rather than waiting for the October tax results. I'm just wondering if you could expand a little bit on what the thinking is around that.
Yeah, since talent is in a scenario where the rebuild has been happening so quickly over the past year, that the assessed values in the urban renewal area are going to significantly change between what the current proposed frozen base is and what the moving the frozen base by 1 year would be. And the change in assessed value is predicted to be so much that it could impact our financial analysis, particularly of the projects that we're doing and how much and when we want to spend the money to make those projects happen. And so if we, if council is interested in pushing back the start date of frozen base, which is some of the feedback that we received from districts, if we are able to wait until that tax roll is certified in October, we can then start from a very solid base and understanding rather than guesswork of what the financial feasibility of that plan is.
Member Padomarav?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Elaine, if you could give us like kind of a back of the envelope idea of what impact that would have as far as scaling back the plan in terms of funding, both near term and long term. Just an idea.
Excuse me, my bet is Jordan might have those numbers handy where I do not. But the other thing that I think can be considered is you if desired, you could extend the length of the plan and still be able to have your maximum indebtedness that you have set upon, but you just may not get that money up front and earlier. So and that would be one of those adjustments you would have to look at once those numbers came out and you saw what they really are and what it meant if you didn't adjust the length of the plan. And Jordan, I wasn't sure I was going to get asked any of those questions, so I don't have any of that information, but my bet is you might.
I do, and I'm actually going to pull up a table right now to help address that question.
And while you're doing that, let the record show that Councilor Pestizo has joined the meeting.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for pushing your schedule to get here. We really appreciate it.
And Jordan, if you want to just go over that last where we're at to catch Dave up, I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So many windows here. Well, welcome, Councilor Pestizo. I'm going to go ahead and just do the quick review. Just so you know, Councilor, tonight, really what we're doing is we're taking in all of the feedback that we received from the other taxing districts and holding a discussion together around, if we want to make any changes to the plan or the proposed plan, shape things and the best pathways of which to make those changes if council decides. Those two pathways are really going for an ordinance, which is, adopting the ordinance, the tool to adopt the plan, or to go with a resolution, which is a statement of intent that says we are going to do an ordinance with these elements, but it's really a tool to help get us to a different timeline, depending on the decisions that council makes. A really great question came up from Councilor Panamara about how the financial impacts of the plan could be between August 24th with the current plan versus delaying the timeline and adopting a plan after August 24th. So I am now going to switch screens with you all. Let's see if I can pick the right one here. Okay, do you all see a table now in front of you? Okay, excellent. So right now, this first line of the table shows the plan as proposed. So that would freeze the tax base as of January 2021, which is a few months after the fire. There's a total maximum indebtedness of 62.5 million with a capacity of about 37.9 million. So a reminder, maximum indebtedness is how much we can spend on both projects as well as staff that are overseeing the projects. Capacity is if we convert all of that into 2022 dollars. So if we were to do all the projects this year, how much money would we have to spend? And the first year of TIF means that very first year that the agency or the district is active, how much could we borrow? So how much cash could we have on hand to start projects? So the biggest difference between the plan as proposed now versus delaying it a year and proposing it is really going to be in the difference in that first year of how much funds we have available to spend. As Elaine said, this maximum indebtedness can match that 62.5 million. Right now, this is showing just if it's a 30-year project, but if we made this a 32-year urban renewal plan, this would jump up to 62.5 million. The difference is really when that money is available to spend. And so as is, we expect to have close to 6 million available to spend in that very first year of the urban renewal agency. If we are to delay the tax base by a year, we would have about 3 million to spend in that first year.
Councilor Panamarev and then Elaine.
Oh, maybe Elaine should go first because I think she may answer my question.
I'm just going to say that I've worked on this project with Nick Papanek, and Nick made these projections, which have been very helpful, but they're just projections. And if you delay, we will know for sure what that number is after the tax rolls are done. And this chart can be redone and it may be different. We just used the best information that we had at the time that we did this, but I just want to make clear that those were projections. And what we will have after October is real numbers.
Thank you, Elaine. Council Panamarev?
Yeah, so my question is just, I just want to make sure I've got this right, and it's really just clarifying, is that by postponing it, if we were to postpone it a year, the frozen base of January currently is January 2021, right after the fire is when that assessment is made. If we postpone it a year and we're saying, you know, November of this year, right? But that will refer to January 2022, right? That whatever the assessed values were at that time, that becomes the frozen base. After which the increases in that small area are what would go to Tura rather than the other agencies that it went to. So do I have that right? Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Counselor.
Any other questions or comments on this slide? Okay. I lost the PowerPoint, Jordan.
Yes, I'm getting it back up for y'all here. I will say technology is not in my favor today. Here we go. So, you know, I think to really help us respond to the feedback that we have received from the various taxing districts, you know, is for the council is agreeing to reach some consensus around, you know, if we do want to change anything within these categories. And so this is really the moment. Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, I just have one comment about this slide, Jordan, before we proceed much further. I see there's no check mark next to delay the frozen base under the ordinance column. And I know, you know, you and I have had many conversations about, you know, my goal as a presiding officer is to put all of the options in front of the council so that they can consider, you know, everything from adopting the full plan as it is to scaling it back to, and then a myriad of options in there as well. And I think it's important to touch on the point that there is no check mark in front of delay the frozen base under ordinance because not because we can't do that, we could, but by delaying the frozen base, it's advised that we wait until the tax recertification, is that the right term? And which is in October, and then begin this consult and confer process again. If I understand your graph here, the missing check is really just based on that advice. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
So please, yeah, I hope I didn't derail you.
No, by no means. I was, you know, going to turn over to council discussion at this point to see if anyone wanted to dive in and making a consensus around, you know, if the council is interested in making any amendment to the current proposal within these topic categories.
Does it make sense to do that now, or should we look at the breakdown of of the recommendations. Yeah, and start to work on that and then maybe circle back to this. I don't know, from a procedure standpoint, that seems like it might be helpful to make the decision you just asked us to give you feedback on after we've had a chance to review the rest of the recommendations and either modify them or, does that make sense?
Yeah, whatever works best for council. Happy to do those pathways. So
Yeah,
what-
and does
yeah.
anybody have any preference about that?
I'll just say this slide is easier for me to talk about than the other slide.
And Council Byers, I did see your hand go up. Did I? I think Council Byers is having signal issues.
Yeah, I actually, if we are going to move on to reviewing recommendations, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. I would ask if we could revisit as we are looking at the recommendations by the other taxing districts, the information that Jordan shared during our last city council meeting, just about city staff capacity to launch and shepherd projects. And as well, I found that a great piece of information, and I would like to just hear that reiterated in context of other recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Happy to share that one verbally, and I can pull up the past slideshow if council wants to dive into more detail. I will be open that first year of having $6 million available is a lot of money to spend for what my staff capacity would be. I think whether we have that 6 million or we have that lower $3 million value, the focus that we have and what we're able to do will be the same. And staff's capacity focus will be to how do we leverage these funds to help us work with that HUD funding that's coming down the pipeline and really make sure that they're complementing each other and setting up the best outcomes for talent. We would be working on some of those projects that we've been working really hard to get funding on that we have not found any on, particularly around hazard mitigation and reducing the fire risk for our community so that we are well prepared for future fire seasons. So staff capacity, we absolutely have the capacity to work on those projects. Would we have the capacity to spend that 6 million within that first 1 to 3 year period? That would not be something that I think that we would be able to do.
I also want to commend your report from the last meeting, because it was very analytical, which is what we hope for in this consult and confer process. I mean, it's the purpose of it, right? And to advance a plan and then hear how those impacts in real terms would could be modified or adjusted. And certainly that's what that presentation did. And I want to let you know that I too really appreciated the clarity that you provided us in that last meeting. It's really helpful in making a decision as we move forward. So does the council have any other comments or questions regarding these different recommendations as it would pertain to the question that's really being asked, which is kind of generally which direction we want to go, right? Ordinance or, yeah. Councilor Penamra, if I saw your hand go up.
I was going to actually just look at the districts, and I was wondering about what the libraries requested. Whether that would be a doable amendment in terms of modifying the boundary, if I recall, to include the library itself and doing some collaborative work with the library, which has been such a great asset to our society, to our community. in general, it seems to me that was a very collaborative, constructive request. And I just wanted to ask staff, is that something that we can do? I know we're kind of close to the 25% area, but is that something fairly doable?
Yes, we could include the library property. It is currently adjacent to the urban rural boundary, so easy to add in, and it's not a huge scale, so it shouldn't tip the balance out of whack, as one might say. And then I would, make a recommendation to council that we add a sentence or two within the plan delineating wanting to include under infrastructure, supporting library services.
Councilor Penamarath?
So I'm just wondering procedurally, do we want to just see if there's consensus around that? These individual things one by one as we look, or what would be the easiest way moving forward?
Yeah, I think I would ask council to do consensus around our responses to each taxing district's recommendation. And then at the very end, I will have us pass a motion to incorporate the discussion had at this meeting.
Yeah, and to be clear for the audience members, this would be what would be presented at tomorrow night's hearing for whatever action would be taken then. Okay. So is this the format you want to use for that? I mean, I thought there was a format where, yeah. Is this format you want to work on?
This will be the format where I record, council's decision on each specific line item.
Okay. So do you want to vote, or you want to just take a consensus on each one of the items and then just vote at the end?
I'm gonna turn it over to Elaine with her hand up.
Elaine?
Elaine, you're on mute right now.
Apology. I wanted to clarify for those who are watching, the statute on urban renewal and considering the consultant and confer period is very specific and says that if you receive a written recommendation, you have to either accept, reject, or modify it. And that is why there's that language in the lavender purple color, is because that's the exact statutory language that provides the guidance to the city council on what they may do. So that's not just something that's made up, it's guidance from the statute.
Okay. So Jordan, I'll just go ahead and let you lead us through the process, and I'll call for the consensus.
Okay, great. So I think just to clarify for all folks in the room, we'll go through as line item by line item and decide if we want to accept, reject, or modify the recommendation. And then when we finish this process, that'll help guide us to whether we want to go ahead and if you all would like us to draft an ordinance for council's consideration in the coming weeks, or a resolution for your consideration in the coming weeks.
Councilor Byers?
Would you like any additional commentary on any of these line items now or in our discussion afterwards?
It can be a blend. I will be taking notes throughout this evening as well as listening to this recording again tomorrow for whatever we are directed to draft, to make sure I'm capturing intent from the council accurately. And just to remind council too, whatever we're directed to draft tonight will be a draft version that we present to you all tomorrow, where further feedback and clarification can be added as well. So with that, I'm gonna come out of presenting mode and into some typing mode here. Okay, so since we don't have to be linear here, so I will go ahead and start us with the library district, since Councilor Penamarath started us off on that one. So the library district has requested, they've made the recommendation that we include the library's building, so their property, into our boundary, and to include their services in the plan to help either maintain or expand library services for the talent population.
Anybody wanna, here we go. Okay, Counselor Clark and then Counselor Byers.
Yes, I support accepting that recommendation, and I appreciate the library's constructive feedback.
Counselor Byers,
As do I. Well put. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
I'm sorry, we lost your audio. There you go.
Yes, I said, as do I. Well put. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Counselor Pestizo,
Yeah, I would accept their request. I think it makes sense. I do have a question about how Tura funds could help with library services. I just don't know how that might work.
I'll give it my first go and then Elaine can go ahead and jump in since I am also learning on the urban renewal arc. What urban renewal could help do is something like do an add-on to the library or help build the infrastructure that allows them to be larger, to expand the services they provide in that way. So any infrastructure support that helps the library, we will not be able to pay for staffing or additional hours or anything like that using urban renewal funds.
Yeah, I guess that's my understanding was we could help with building like you suggested, but I'm just not sure what kind of services we could help with. And that's my only concern with accepting this is if we're, leading, suggesting that we can do something that maybe we can't. And I'm not sure what they mean by services.
Counselor, let's go with David and then Elaine.
Thank you. And perhaps Elaine might be saying a similar response here. I think it is really critical to get clarity on whether the library is asking for specifically what they're asking for, and perhaps in the materials you have that's clear. I'm just not aware of it myself. I only wanted to point out that if it is a building, an actual improvement of land, let's call it that, whether it's an expansion or new building, that would take the concurrence of other taxing districts before you could do it. So really, I'm not saying that's off the table. It's just, I don't see how you could fit that in if you were to go forward with the plan and adopt an ordinance, with the current tax base. I think that would be difficult to achieve without essentially having a concurrence of those taxing districts. So I just want to be sure that the council is aware of that.
Elaine?
And yes, that was exactly what I was going to say. I think you could include the library property, but state that before any project was approved for a public building for the library, it would have to be approved according to the public building provision of the statute. So I think you could address it that way, and that at that some point in the future, if you decided to do the building, you then would have to get approval of the other taxing jurisdictions as prescribed by the statute. And David, does that make sense to you also?
Elaine, it does. Yes, I think the statute is pretty clear about what you need to do and how many districts need to, approve. And so I think if it were, something that would be, discussed and clearly stated that to the extent it's a building, we would go through this process, I think that would be okay.
Counselor Greider?
Yeah, but the building would still have to remain, it would be like an expansion on the building where it is within the urban renewal boundary, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. And, I don't mean to suggest that this is the only consideration. I just wanted to be sure that if a building were what the library was really talking about, that at the very least, you're going to have other taxing districts approve that. They largely get a veto on any public building that's included in an urban renewal plan. You still have, the rest of what the statute calls for in terms of the benefit to the urban renewal district, blight issues, all of that would still be there. So we'd want to, naturally take a look at that. But just as a threshold matter, if we were going to add that building, I wanted to be sure the council realized that I think you almost would be looking at doing that, you have to be doing that in the future at some point.
I have a real quick technical question, then I'll take Council Panamarev. So if we added the district, do we have to move the boundary somewhere else? Or are we still below the threshold where we can just add it without moving our boundary anywhere else?
We can add it without moving the boundary itself. I have identified one area that if we do go over, we could change the boundary on for a piece of property that is in the floodway, not very developable, and therefore wouldn't have a huge impact.
So we don't have to, but we could, is what I'm hearing you say, without impact to the overall plan.
What we would do, so we have a surveyor that we have hired who has defined the legal boundary of the plan and the actual legal acreage. So we would double check with him. As long as it's below that 25% max, we can add it, no problem.
Yeah, and I think we're below that max now, right, Elaine? Yeah, so we have some room. So I guess what I'm getting at is that adding them really doesn't have any impact one way or the other to the overall cost of the plan. And if they had, if they have, and it doesn't seem to impact any other area of the district that we feel is really important to the overall recovery. I mean, if we were drawing back a boundary and it was cutting off something else that was more important, I think that would be a consideration, but it sounds to me like we've got room to just add it on. It doesn't impact the cost or the revenue. And so it's almost like a no harm, no foul. And if they have plans in the future that are allowed uses that really benefited the urban renewal district, they wouldn't be excluded from it. So I almost feel like the level of detail, since there is no actual impact, is of less importance. But that's just my thought. Councilor Panamarev?
Yeah, I concur with your thinking. I don't think there's any harm in adding it. And if there were some sort of construction project later on, we would just simply ask the other districts for this particular building, this particular project, to see if they concur. My question really has to do with, and I do remember now, once upon a time reading about that extra hurdle for public buildings. But if we were talking about something like a building improvement, maybe solar panels, or an improvement of a playground or something like that, would all of those things, any kind of change, need to go through that process as well?
So I'm not sure if Elaine has encountered this at all. I think it's a question without a certain answer, Counselor. Unfortunately, it does talk about the statute defines what a public building is, and on its face it would seem as if you're talking about what you and I would consider to be a building. I don't know of any court that has really interpreted that, any decision that's interpreted that. So, again, conservative advice would be that if you're going to be making any improvements to it, even something like solar panels, that, we would think of that as being improvements to a public building and within the statute. But I can't tell you that the statute says that. So.
Thank you.
Elaine?
What the statute does say is it identifies the public library as a public building needing to go through this process. And it does also say the grounds owned by a public building adjacent to a building described in subparagraph 8. So I think what the intent of that was, anything to do with those public buildings, as identified, and a library would fit that. So, as David said, it's not specific, but I think it's clear enough that you would want to go through the public building process as prescribed.
Okay, so I think we have a long way to go still. So if there's some different questions or some different comments, we'll go ahead and entertain those before we complete the consensus. And if any information that we've gotten changes anybody's mind, we'll circle back to you. I assume you're tracking who's already, yeah, okay. And that was to you, Jordan. So any other comments or questions before we finish the, yeah, okay. So who do you have left, Jordan?
Yeah, so I am looking for Greider and Prey Miller for consensus around, if we want to, I should double check first. What I'm hearing is two potential options here. One is accept, their full recommendation, which would be to add their property into the urban renewal, and then to add in a statement that public infrastructure could include public facilities. In that event, we would go talk to the other taxing jurisdictions per ORS to get approval. Or are we doing the modify, which is we will include their property in the urban renewal boundary, but we will not mention projects in the current plan, and that could be a future amendment if the urban renewal district decides to move forward a project.
Yeah, all of which is subject to the agreements of all the other jurisdictions.
Exactly.
So why don't we start over? Because I think that's a clarification that others may want to weigh in on. So Elaine?
Yes, it's not all of the jurisdictions. And I will, it's either 75% or 3 of the top 4, and I will find that. David, do you have that part up? I can find it.
I do. Yeah, it's like so much of the statute. It's not exactly transparent, but it basically says that at least 3 of the 4 taxing districts that are estimated to forego the most property tax revenue as computed in the report accompanying the plan. So again, that could be a shifting number depending on what frozen tax base you go with. I certainly don't know that to be true, but it could be. But it looks like you'd be looking for the 4 that would get the most impact, and then if at least, let's see, sorry,
You need 3, yeah, you need 3 of the 4 to approve. So if
Yeah.
you lose one of them, but and that I think for you would be the city, the county, the fire district, and the school district.
That seems both very clear to me. The statute seems clear to me, and also fair. So I appreciate us taking a minute to check that out. Councilor Penamarath?
And to be clear, it would be at a later point after adoption, we would ask for their agreement to do some specific project with the library. And that would be what they would be weighing in on, not the entire plan or anything like that.
and assuming
Okay.
that project is a building project, correct?
Okay, thank you.
So I do want to clarify one point I made earlier about how moving the boundary to include the library would have no impact. Based on my experience with urban renewal, the impact it would have is that if some reason we later needed to move the boundary to include a little small piece of something that we didn't include, having this additional, having that buffer that we have right now and losing that buffer by adding the library can impact. But it sounds to me it can impact future amendments. But it sounds to me like we have that floodway property that would kind of be buffer as well. And we're really not actually talking about a lot of property here, right? So it's just something to think about. It's sort of like if you maximize the amount and you don't have a buffer and you do want to, you know, add a sidewalk, a few more feet of sidewalk or something, it can impact that. And I just want to walk that back a little bit. Okay, so the question before us now is accept, reject, or modify. So why don't we just go through and the modifications are as described by Jordan. Does that sound right, Jordan? Okay. So let's try this again. Counselor Byers? You're accepting it? Okay. As it is, without modifying it. Okay, Counselor Panamarev?
Yeah, I think we have to modify it so to whatever tour is allowed to do. So as Jordan explained, I would say modify.
Counselor Clark?
Jordan laid out two things. I'm not sure which one is modify. I would support option one, which I believe included adding to the plan itself, not just to the boundary. You know, the library is a tremendous asset to our community. I'm proud to know it has one of the highest usage rates in the county, and I think that, you know, improving any improvements to the library itself would be consistent with the, you know, the core goals of the Tura plan in general, and so I don't have a problem seeing that in there also.
So would that be, is that still modifying, Jordan? It sounds to me like that is actually accepting. Yeah,
I would define that as accept.
so we have 2 for accept and 1 for modify. Counselor Greider?
I'm so sorry, but Jordan, can you say the modify again? I'm so sorry. I'm confused a little.
Absolutely. So modify would be to include the library's property within the urban renewal boundary. Accept would be to include the property in the boundary, as well as state within our plan that one of our goals would be to help maintain and expand library services, subject to approval by taxing jurisdictions per ORS.
Okay, so accept.
Counselor Pestizo?
I think I would go with the modify at this point. The modified version that Jordan explained.
Counselor Perry Miller?
I'll go with accept.
So we have 4 for accept and 2 for modify. Or is that the answer you're looking for at this point, Jordan?
I believe so.
You have a majority. Counselor Panamarev?
Yeah, I'm fine with accept. It just didn't seem quite doable. But I am a big fan of the library, so if that makes anything easier.
Yeah, I think there's about 7 degrees of separation really,
Yeah.
but yeah. Okay, I think we've answered this one. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I'm gonna get something to drink. I'll be right back.
The next one we do will go ahead and be Phoenix above. Oops, I'm not able to edit that. Apologies all. So Phoenix, oh, pardon me, Mayor.
Go ahead.
So jumping into Phoenix here. Phoenix recommendation is to not adopt an urban renewal plan and instead leverage other funding opportunities. They also had a second recommendation where if we do create a new district, so if we do adopt an urban renewal plan, delay freezing the tax base by 1 year. So I will start us off with that very first recommendation they have, which is to not adopt an urban renewal plan specific to the fire rebuild. And I will open that up for council's discussion to either accept, saying we will not adopt an urban renewal plan, reject to say that we will adopt an urban renewal plan. And modify for me is difficult. I don't quite understand how we could modify this specific one.
But if someone comes up with something, don't hesitate to share it with the rest of us. Counselor Byers.
Well, I see these two recommendations as one, really, a continuation, and the secondary one is the modification. Is that perhaps one way to think about the modify?
I'm going to throw that question to Elaine with her deeper experience.
Get all the hard questions, don't I? I think, I don't know. I don't think there is any set answer to that. If I like the way that it is set out here, where you have them separated into two. So to say, the first is saying don't adopt a plan, and I think you can respond to that. And the second is saying, well, if you do, so that might be a, I don't know what that is. That's maybe a modify their first one, like you were saying, Councilor Byers. I think that is confusing, but I think if you look at them separately and get responses, you'll know how you want to answer it.
Councilor Penamara?
Yeah, I agree that these are separate considerations. And if I recall reading the Phoenix response, they use the word alternately, do this other thing. So I think it's clear to me to reject the rejection, if you will, the idea to reconsider. So the first one would be reject. The second one is actually quite interesting, and I'm thinking about it in the context of your presentation, Jordan, about the effects on the city. And I think I'd like to hear what other councilors have to say, but I am feeling supportive of a delay of 1 year of the tax base. Quick technical question though, that would make what we're talking about, the freeze date having to be before the effective date. When we say we talk about January, but by freeze date, we mean the recertification date that comes out from the assessor's office, which is the October, November. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think the first one, my response is reject. For the second one, I'm thinking about accept, but I do want to hear from other councilors.
Councilor Clark?
Yes, thank you. On the first item, I reject that as well. I think there's a lot of reasons why an urban renewal area is an essential tool in our path towards restoring our community. And I think we'll probably get a chance to flesh that out in greater detail. But I do reject the notion of throwing out the whole plan. As far as freezing the tax base, I also agree with Councilor Penamara and really want to express appreciation to Jordan for the analysis that you provided. And also to the feedback that we have received from Rogue Valley Transportation District and from other community members. And I'm really glad that we made it to this point on the schedule to have all options on the table. And that was no small effort to get to this point, but given the information that we have received from the city, I feel like modifying the plan to delay the freeze date by 1 year is perfectly reasonable.
Council Pestizo?
Yeah, I would concur with the last two counselors. I would reject the first consideration, and I would accept the second one. I think Jordan did do a great job presenting, and I think it's the best option to help rebuild our city and also keep with the urban renewal money, but also keep the city's core functions going along pretty well. And I'm hoping that it helps some of the other taxing districts feel a little more comfortable with what we're trying to do and cooperate. So
Thank you.
Reject the first and accept the second.
Council Greider?
Yeah, I agree and say the same. I was getting a little bit confused, I think, with the accept and modify, because we are not talking about the modification that happens in the plan. Like, this is just for this actual sentence right here. So yeah, I would say accept, reject and accept.
Council Byers?
Yes, I would vote to reject the first recommendation and accept the second for all the reasons stated by my fellow councilors.
Council Perry Miller?
I definitely agree that the first recommendation I would reject, and I could be persuaded to accept the second.
I'm going to add to the conversation. Obviously, the vote is the only time that I really get, you know, an actual vote is when, even in a consensus, is when there's a split, and that's not the case here. But I think it's important to say, because there's a lot of community discussion going on, and to really transparently declare my position on these items. There's over 100 hotel rooms that still have our families in them. And there are FEMA trailers still in use. And the Gateway project is full. As long as there are our neighbors and our community members cast asunder, I could not support a decision that accepted us, that would accept reconsideration of adopting a plan. We need all the tools to bring our families back home. We wouldn't abandon any of our neighbors. And this is not where, we're not there yet. We haven't recovered, and we've got a long, long way to go. And there's children that are still having to travel from Medford to their schools. The crisis is still ongoing, and it's still tragic. So I would reject the reconsideration of adopting an urban renewal plan. But as demonstrated by a great analysis, which we hoped for, we longed for as we advanced this plan, there is a place where we can scale back our original proposal and have this powerful tool to recover our community, bring our families back home, provide for housing, an affordable housing crisis that was well on its way before the fire and is exacerbated by the fire, where we can reinvest in ways that we haven't in the past in resiliency, reducing our vulnerability and our reliance on continued rescue. That's not to abandon it, but to reduce it. There's a place where we can utilize the funds to help recover community businesses that are not able to recover. I think it's important for people to know that of the 68 brick and mortar buildings that have burned, I believe the statistic is still that 11 brick and mortar businesses that have burned. It's still the statistic that 11 have pulled permits to be able to rebuild. And the stories around that are also tragic. So I want to thank the city. I want to also thank the other jurisdictions that have pointed out to us that there is a place where we can utilize a tool like this to recover, to continue on this long journey of recovery and still maintain services, providing for growing budgets with all the jurisdictions. And so I would also accept a freeze date of January 2022, because I believe that that's been demonstrated for us.
Thank you, Mayor, for sharing. I am going to move us to the next set of jurisdiction responses. Counselor.
Just a point of order. I'm wondering if we could mute the Q&A or just advise folks that putting things in the chat in the Q&A is essentially interrupting the deliberation.
I'll put that in Hector's good hands here. Thank you. So Jackson County's feedback letter, their wording in the letter is do not adopt the plan as proposed. And I will say, in my reading interpretation of the letter, they recommended looking at other ways to use urban renewal. So when it comes to the council's decision whether accept, reject, or modify, as long as it's a consensus, I would interpret and accept, if council, as we've determined in the last slide, does want to change the tax frozen base, that does change the plan as proposed. So in some ways, I would interpret accept and align with changing that frozen tax base, though if council feels otherwise and feels reject is more accurate, I will base it off the conversation we have tonight on what definition that is.
Any comments? Councilor Byers?
I'm in agreement with Jordan that if we have just accepted the recommendation to adjust the frozen tax base start date, then it is adjustment to the plan proposed. And if we continue in that vein, to accept Jackson County's recommendation would be to continue this other line recommendation.
Councilor Ponomarev?
I'm a little concerned that accept could sound like wholesale acceptance of everything that was in their response. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know if it will come down to legalities, but I really don't want to put this process at risk. I think that, so that's why I'm wary of using the term accept in this context. It seems like we want to say accept if you mean this, but yeah, I'm wary of the word accept, but I do agree with the analysis that in a way we are not accepting, that we are not adopting it as proposed, but I feel like that's a condensing of a lot of things that they said. So I'm wary of the word accept. I'm looking for another word.
Elaine?
I'm going to defer to David first.
So my thought was that I personally believe there's nothing hard and fast in the statute about this, that you could choose to modify that recommendation, consider it a modification, to kind of get to that concern that, you know, wholesale acceptance, there's maybe a lot more than just, I think condensing it like this is fantastic for the you know, the purposes of tonight. And so, you know, if ultimately that's the decision that we want to look at, you know, delaying the frozen tax base, that the modification could be something to that effect, that we are not going to adopt the plan as specifically outlined today, but that doesn't mean that the city doesn't have an intent to adopt a plan. That seems pretty clear from your discussion. So to me, that's sort of a modification, or at least I think you could certainly consider it one.
Elaine?
I was going to suggest the same.
Counselor Greider?
Yeah, I vote for that, for modify. I was thinking the same thing, maybe a modify would be best, and then that was very well explained, so I would say modify, please.
Counselor Pestizo?
Yeah, they were able to formulate what I was trying to get to myself. I like the modify this to change the start date.
Counselor Clark?
Modify.
Counselor Perry Miller?
I guess I'm still concerned about some of the things that were in that letter, and I frankly would be more comfortable with saying that we reject it.
Counselor Panamarev?
Yeah, I find myself leaning towards reject only because I feel like if this were binding in any way, it would obligate staff to you know, to work with the county going through a lot of the things, and they have a very different idea about how to use urban renewal than I think we do. So I guess, you know, I certainly wouldn't want to prevent staff from collaborating with whomever. That's fine. I'm just afraid of anything that might bind us in some way. But then there's kind of another question. If we at the end of this discussion end up with a resolution, is any of this binding anyway? And so I'm not quite sure about that. But I'm a little more comfortable with reject at this point.
I think, if you don't mind, I'll jump in to just answer some of the questions there, Councilor Palmerath, and David, feel free to jump in, because we did discuss this earlier. You know, this process of accepting, rejecting, modify, you know, is part of the statute process that we need to go through. So if council directs staff to compose an ordinance for you all to consider and adopt, our answers today will be incorporated. If we do decide to do the resolution route and to change the effective date and wait until the tax roll is certified, and we do go through the consult and confer process again, these answers, you know, would be a part of that record. We would do the new written recommendations that we get under the new tax base. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the part where you said, so this wouldn't be binding?
It will be, and maybe David, I'll have you answer that one, but my understanding is it will be binding if we choose to go for an ordinance.
Yes.
Whereas if we choose to go for a resolution, we would do a consult and confer process again, and we'd respond to that written recommendation.
Got it. Thank you.
I think that was well said. And, you know, you know, I don't think it's, if you choose the resolution route, but you're not starting over from scratch, and none of it, you know, was worth anything. Quite the contrary. I think you've got a lot there to work with. You're really just talking about, okay, now we're talking about a sort of a different financial assumption, and it's really working on that and seeing how that affects things. So, but you know, it wouldn't bind you to any particular outcome until you adopt a plan through an ordinance. I think none of it is technically binding.
at this point, you have two rejects and 4 modifies. Counselor Perry Miller?
Thank you. I think I'm trying to understand based on the proposal that we just accepted from Phoenix. I guess I'm trying to figure out if there's any way that we would be moving forward with an ordinance tomorrow, and if not, then should we even continue to go through all of these different recommendations? Like if this whole process is going to be postponed, I think I'm just confused.
I would say if council's in agreement that resolution is the pathway that we want to take a look at, we do not have to finish the specific response to taxing district feedback. I would like to do a quick review with council, just in case council's thoughts change the potential content of the resolution. But I will say, I do think, I'm gonna do a quick glance, the remainder of the feedback is of similar veins. Yeah, I would say of similar veins. So it may not be much benefit in going through each individual recommendation.
I guess, just to follow up, thanks, Jordan. With the recommendation from Phoenix, is there any avenue of us doing an ordinance with that recommendation?
You know, I think there's nothing that prevents us from doing it. You know, I would be highly concerned that if we move forward with an ordinance without strong surety around the actual numbers that'll be coming up that'll be certified this October, we don't have a strong of an understanding of how much or when we will spend the funds. So part of the urban renewal process is to create the financial feasibility. So when do we expect to have money, how much, and how do we expect to spend it throughout the lifetime of the plan? Since the rebuild is having such a huge impact on assessed value, you know, I'm hesitant to use the projections as our basis. You know, we base them off the best information we have, but it is always a question of what does the certification actually come out as. And David, I see you unmuted for a better answer there.
No, not a better one at all, just to sort of provide some support with that. You know, as unfortunate as that might be, because I know, you know, again, this is, you know, maybe one of the more, at least from my mind, compelling, you know, sort of bases for having urban renewal, given what happened. But I do think that's very wise and warranted, and I think that there's some decent exposure that would be behind proceeding with an ordinance and adoption of a plan that's based upon those types of assumptions. I think you really do need, it's wise, very wise, to wait until you get those certified.
There's also something to be said that if the council is accepting the new date, that it does give, it's an evolving picture that allows us an opportunity to go back and have new conversations with our other partners and provide for, you know, under these circumstances. I mean, I know that happens in the confer, but I remember, you know, some of the testimony that happened at the county where they seemed like they would have some input if we were scaling back the plan that could provide benefit to this overall discussion. And so, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Councilor Perry Miller?
Thank you. I guess I should just clarify, I'm fine going forward and going through all of the recommendations. I guess I'm just trying to figure out like procedurally what we should be doing and in what order. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
I definitely, agree, like procedurally, I tend to like, we're taking feedback from the community. Once the same thing has been said more than one or two times, it's no longer necessary if there's concurrence. And so I don't think we need to continue to make the same decision over and over, and unless there's something different left for us to decide on. I think we could probably just move to the ordinance and resolution. Jordan, based on what you just looked at, is there anything new for us to decide on, or is it the rest is the same?
I would say the rest is the same, just said in different wording. I would love to open up then to council to discuss, the content of a resolution, and really what parameters you all would like to see in it. Just to clear people on what this next step of the process would be, is tonight, I will collect info from council on the parameters that you'd like within that resolution. That could be things we've already discussed, the start date that we would be considering to amend the plan. That could be a ballot referral. That could be making sure we talk to other taxing districts like the library to figure out exactly what they meant for clarification. Or doing more, all the content and things that declare the intent of the council that I can then go out and make sure happens. So what will happen is you guys will give me direction tonight on the content. Elaine and I will work together to draft that content, and we'll present a draft to you all as council tomorrow night to review and make any changes that you see fit to better represent the will of the council. And then you all will have an opportunity to vote on that resolution. Okay, and so if we're ready for that discussion, I will share. I'm hearing, one component of that is to delay the tax base so that it starts January 2022, and to clarify that is the tax roll that will be certified this October.
Councilor Pestizo?
Yeah, I might be jumping ahead a little bit, so you can stop me, but I would just say that if we're gonna be delaying the start, I would like to see more outreach to the jurisdictions, but I'd also really like to see if we can get more input from really, I think, some of the talent residents who, for me, and I'm assuming for most of the people here, are most impacted by the fire and are having the hardest time coming back. The fire was devastating to a lot of people. And some of us were fortunate, we just had to evacuate for a week, like myself, and come back. Some of us lost our homes and were able to rebuild because they were insured appropriately and sufficiently. But there was a lot of people that their insurance didn't quite cover it, or they were renting, or they were in mobile homes, and they're just like left out hanging. And I'm not sure we're hearing from them at this point. And I would really like to hear from them and give them a voice in this process, because I'm feeling like if we don't, we're sort of making decision without having the input of the people who are, in my view, most severely impacted by what happened back in 2020. So I'm not exactly sure how you'd put that into an ordinance or a resolution, but that's part of my core thinking about this.
That's really thoughtful. Councilor Pestizo. Councilor Byers?
Thank you, Councilor Pastiso, for saying that. It's similar to what I've been thinking. I would value the additional space a resolution could give us to also find the potential ways we may inadvertently be creating a negative impact on the people we are hoping to positively impact the most. We're hoping this will positively impact everyone, but it would be wonderful to take that extra space to cultivate as much foresight as possible in our decision-making process.
Just to Council Byers, at that point, I want to let you all know something kind of fun is I emailed Portland has an anti-displacement city planning team. And they were very excited for the potential to talk with us about ways that we could, weave language in to help address that specific topic.
The other thing, since we're on this topic, and then we can get back to the question at hand, but I think there's also like a lot of misunderstanding about, how these decisions as they've been coming, or the proposed plans as they've been coming towards this, towards the city and towards the community, have just largely gone unsupported, and that is not the case. Really, the case is that the plan as proposed would cause such a burden on our jurisdiction that that the analysis you provided for us demonstrated that, but also providing more input and feedback to the plan about how the city can utilize a tool like this to really complement some of those other funds that have constraints in areas that we cannot use it in. You mentioned some earlier. I'm aware of them, having served on the ad hoc committee for the next level of grants that are coming, and also, just a little more detail. I mean, that's what time gives you, right? Is an opportunity for a little more detail. I mean, we can always use that. And a little more detail about where the constraints are, what the gaps that can be filled, and because there are some. There will continue to be some, and those needs are still also really, really urgent. So if we're talking about, how can we utilize a resolution as an opportunity to refine what we're doing in the next couple of months? You can't perfect a 30-year plan, but you can refine it a little bit if we have a little more time. I'd like to see a little more work done on that. And just kind of dispel some of the mythology that this is, something the staff's against, and that the scaled back plan is seen as an opportunity by all of us. Okay, any other comment? So she's still looking for, let's get back to the question at hand. She's still looking for feedback for a resolution in the event that that's the direction we go in. I mean, whatever data you have available, I think, there's always room for some of the data in terms of, who's still in the areas and the buckets that we've identified as being the most important areas, and that's affordable housing, that is resiliency, reducing the vulnerability of our community, and ways to do that, recognizing that is the case, and an acknowledgement that our commercial sector is devastated with no means, up until recently, where we've been able to secure some means, but those two being very, very constrained federal funding, where we can fill the gaps. That's a tall order. I hope we can get some of that. Anybody else? Councillor Perry Miller.
Yeah, I think just there's been a lot of I think that just like really trying to get back to remembering why we're all doing this, similar to what the mayor just said, getting back to our mission of bringing all of our families home and recovering after the fire, which was 2 years ago, and we are not there, and we are not close to being finished, and we still have families that are struggling and kids that are, like Darby said, being bused a long way to get to school every day. I would just really love for this resolution to reflect that need is part of why we're, so focused on this, laser focused. And I would hope that that's something we could incorporate. And I know that Jordan is always very good at bringing our mission to everything that she does. So.
I swear the mute button, it's going to be the bane of my existence. I think we're, you know, contrary to popular belief, we're all anxious to get back to the live meetings. You know, we almost got there at one point in time, and then COVID spiked again. I think we're getting close again. I'll be glad just to get rid of the mute button. Councilor Pestizo?
Yeah, I think it's also important to make a little clear about, you know, some of the roles that different agencies play in keeping us safe and secure from fire and other things, right? There's people that fight fires, and there's also preventative things that need to be done to keep the fires out of the city in the first place. And, you know, different agencies play different roles. And, you know, for me, it's been a little disappointing in this process that and I'm not sure what the reasons are, that we haven't had more discussion about how we can complement each other in that area. I mean, that's one of my sort of pet areas as a counselor. And, you know, I was part of creating the evacuation maps, and, you know, really what can we do to facilitate better, more efficient evacuations from fires or floods or hazardous material, you know, whatever it might be. And so I think helping to just spell out a little bit what the different roles are and who can, you know, which agencies are in the best position to do them. Because I think there's a role that the city really needs to be playing to help keep the city safe. And I'm not really hearing it in the public discourse that at least I'm reading and hearing on different venues. So if we could work something in about that, I think that would be helpful.
Councilor Penamara?
I was just going to ask if we could see the slide again about the things that the resolution were touch on.
Absolutely. And if you all don't mind, I am going to just hand the gavel over to Hector really quick for me to just take a really quick, and I will review the audio later on to listen. Is this big enough for you all? Great. Hector, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand just my role off to you to take notes for the next 2 minutes here.
I just want to make a quick comment on Councilor Pestizo's. You know, I have seen some of the, you know, of the letters that we're getting, and I've read one recently where the person was talking about how, you know, how one of the jurisdictions needs additional funding to do work within the city to create a safer city. And I think it's important what Councilor Pestizo just said, from the standpoint that I think there's often a misunderstanding about, you know, what jurisdictions can and cannot do in each other's jurisdictions. And the fact is that the only jurisdiction that can harden our city is the city. And we, you know, any hazard mitigation or improving our infrastructure for hazard mitigation and emergency services within the city boundary has to happen by the city. And it's just a question of looking at vulnerability in a different way and trying to you know, trying to parse that work out. And I want to hold that comment up that Councilor Pestizo said in this conversation, because it is the promise of this plan that we do that work. And I just really appreciate that he spelled that out so well. All right, Councilor Penamara, did you have something on this slide that you wanted to review?
Well, it was really just the slide itself. I think that of the check marks, we've gotten consensus on delaying the frozen base 1 year. We talked about amending the boundary and amending the projects, I think already to your satisfaction, Jordan, and people have made some really great comments about expressing the need, expressing, I think it would be also, we could have something in the resolution that clarifies the misunderstanding about how this is an intentional tool that is discussed in the law, that communities who have suffered flood, fire, other disasters, that this tool is intended for that use. So I think the only thing that we haven't talked about yet here is the potential for referral. And I just wanted to say one thing that before we talk about, because I am going to ask about dates. I just wanted to say, like everyone else has been saying, Jordan, thank you for the analysis that we needed. It really added depth and detail, and it helped my understanding. And I also wanted to thank the mayor for you were determined that we would have all the choices before us, and you did that. And I think this is also one that bears discussion. So my first question about referral is dates. I think it would have to be referred, this is my understanding, would have to be referred sometime in February, I don't remember the exact date, to make the May ballot. And if we as a council were to refer, that would be something that would be done after second reading. And the question is there like a 30-day waiting period? Because there's a 30-day waiting period for it to go into effect. So I'm thinking about dates and timelines because I want to understand that before we move forward.
I'd also like an opportunity to speak to why I asked to have this put on. I mean, it is for all options, but there's some clarifying that I'd like to do around it. Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, I was going to throw the technical question over to Elaine or David to discuss how, if it is referred to the ballot, at what date do we need to have an ordinance pass and a plan effective?
So I can speak a little bit to, just referral broadly. If that were the council's choice to send essentially adoption of the plan on to the voters. I'm not certain of the dates. That's a calendar thing that the Secretary of State would have. What you would essentially do is in the ordinance itself. I think this is the best way to do it. To say that the effective date of the plan would be the date that the vote is certified, the date that we could come up with what that specific language would be. But in essence, you'd be putting the effective date on hold until that vote. Obviously, if the vote were a majority voted no, you wouldn't have a plan. And then if it were a vote in the affirmative, we'd just have something in the ordinance itself that would say it's effective on that date, or like I said, maybe the date that the vote is certified.
I can add in the timing to get it on the May ballot, which is the earliest ballot that we would be able to put this on. And we would need to get to the elections office, the ballot title and the ballot description by mid-February. So we would have wanted to have voted on an ordinance prior to mid-February.
Councilor Panamarev?
But clarification, but not 30 days prior. It wouldn't have had to be that 30-day chunk or anything. Okay. Thanks.
My comment is that it's been, as a presiding officer, my focus has been about making sure that we get all of the options in front of our council. And it's everything from the full proposed plan, as proposed to, to the other end of the spectrum, which was shown tonight. And so, we've had some feedback, not a lot, honestly, about putting this before the voters. But in the event that the council decides to accept all of the recommendations that we and that we talked about tonight, build them into a resolution. We're going to have some more of that time that we talked about a little bit earlier in the conversation, and this has been an extraordinary piece of legislation that has experienced an incredible amount of hostility and misinformation, and it is an opportunity for us to provide for greater exposure to our community, more education to our community with this additional time, and parse it out piece by piece to create a higher level of understanding and security about a plan that's scaled back in such a way that it provides for a tool for our community to recover and to provide for the ability to maintain services with growing budgets at the jurisdictions. And this additional time to provide the community with that more detailed analysis, step by step, and then allow them to make a choice at the ballots, in my mind, puts this this re-traumatization of our community to bed once and for all. And it is an opportunity for learning and deciding as a community. And I think what I'm most excited about is that, and what makes this an easier thought process for me, is that we have hired an outstanding city manager who is providing and demonstrating regularly that her team has the chops to provide us the depth of analysis that our community will benefit from over the course of the next few months. So much so that I think it provides for a greater opportunity for the community to make that decision about how we want to redistribute tax dollars generated from within the burn scar. So, I mean, in deeper thought, it just makes more sense. And I really hope that the council considers that as part of the resolution, and that it gets built in as part of the resolution for consideration for tomorrow night. Those are my thoughts. So the one thing I do want to ask Jordan is, I mean, procedurally, I think I would go ahead and take the speaker request forms at this time before we look to a decision about, I mean, in this case, we're really, we're not adopting anything until tomorrow night. So, I mean, why don't we just conclude and we'll get a consensus about whether or not we're going to get an ordinance or a resolution going, and then we'll go ahead and go to the speaker request forms. And then I think what we need to know is whether or not we want to build in not just those things that we accepted tonight, but also, and those things that we suggested as part of the resolution, but also to refer it to the voters in May. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. So we'll do the roundhouse here, around the table. Councillor Panamarev.
So I was actually gonna parse that a little bit more as far as the changes to the plan and all of that. I'm not I'm wondering if it doesn't need, if it needs to be in the resolution, if staff is going to take a look and look at the plan and maybe do some of that clarification anyway, that maybe we don't have to incorporate all of that in the resolution, except maybe just the library part. I'm just wondering if that.
Jordan?
One thing that's really nice about the resolution is it's a message and tool of the intent of the council and of the city. And so I would recommend, for those things that we know for sure that we want to have incorporated in the final ordinance that the council does vote on, let's make sure we name those specific things. For me, those specific things would be that it's important for the community to know and for us to help educate community about is the delay of 1 year for the tax roll certification. And then 2, if the council wants to go to ballot referral within the ordinance as well. In terms of changes to the project boundaries or the project's lists, I think that one we don't have to go into the details about because we will be talking with our partners and more changes will come along through the process over the next few months.
And we'll be reviewing as we go along, I would imagine.
We'll be reviewing and making those changes through the council's vote.
Great. Sounds like a great plan. Sounds like a great direction to go in. Sounds to me like you'd like to hear on 2 fronts, 3 fronts, really, ordinance resolution. And then if it's resolution, include your affirmation of the delay freeze date and also whether or not you want to build a referral into it. Okay, Councillor Penamarath.
Yay, I get to go first. Resolution. Yes, delay 1 year. Referral, I'm thinking yes. I'm leaning towards yes on referral. I guess I think I would like it to be specific to referral to the May ballot. I wouldn't want it to get, because I know November 2023 is it's not a general election. I'm wondering if we are constrained which elections we're allowed to put this on. So if there are constraints that way, I'd like to make sure it is May. Anything else would cause us to probably have to delay another year. So, and I wouldn't want that to happen inadvertently. So yeah, resolution, delay freeze date a year.
Specifying the ballot date.
And a referral, yes, specifying the ballot date, please. Thanks.
Mayor, if you don't mind me chiming in, I am, for the sake of this consensus, with the specification of May 2023 for the ballot date. I don't think I would want to or have my staff go through longer than that period if it were to be referred. So for the consensus sake, assume referral would be for the May 2023 ballot, which I know we can get on.
Great. Councillor Clark.
Yes, resolution, delay the freeze date to January 2022. And I do support referring to the voters. The mayor raised this in a conversation with me a little while back. And I think in this sense, instance, it makes a lot of sense. And it really is with the community's well-being in mind and the opportunity to really communicate and educate and correct some of the misinformation and the re-traumatization that has occurred. I think this is the best path forward in this circumstance.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Byers.
I would support a referral to the ballot, a resolution, and a frozen tax base starting in 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Byers. Councillor Greider.
So yes, to the resolution and the delay of the freeze date. Yeah, I really want to I really agree with everything Councillor Clark just said. I would say it's a little bit hard for me. I work with fire survivors every day, and there are just there's so many people that are still struggling. But I would say yes, referral to the ballot, and just am confident that we can share and communicate information that educates the community.
I appreciate that comment, because really it is such an expression in the confidence of our community and what our priorities are. Councilor Perry Miller?
Thank you. Yes to the resolution. Yes to delaying for 1 year to January 2022 numbers. And I am also in support of referring this to the ballot.
Thank you, Councilor Perry Miller. Councilor Pestizo?
Yeah, I would say resolution, delay the start date to January 2022 and refer to the vote with for me, the emphasis on, since some of our most affected community members are not even living in Talent, I'm just wondering if they're going to be able to vote on this. I think it's important to make sure they know what's going on and that they can vote, because I think with all they've been through, having some way of feeling they're empowered to do something would be very valuable for them. Thanks.
Councilor Greider?
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I want to kind of second that and just say that I have heard comments from fire survivors that a lot of the conversations around this have been hurtful and have felt like maybe there isn't as much support for them coming home. So I really agree that if there's a way to, I mean, yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because they are displaced, and the vote could be tricky in terms of that.
That's an important consideration. Okay. So you have consensus on a resolution, full consensus, unanimous consensus on a resolution on delaying the date by 1 year so that we can have a recovery tool while providing for services and growing budgets for the other jurisdictions, including ours. And then also referring it to the voters in May. Councillor Penamrev?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. This is my understanding that even though we're referring it in May, because of the way, the dates all work, it's not really delaying the assuming it's approved by the voters. We're not introducing additional delays as far as getting things done. Is that a correct assumption?
I do not know for sure whether the May vote means the ordinance that was passed before January 1st is effective that date, or whether it moves it out. And David or Jordan, maybe you both know that answer.
I would say if we referred it to the ballot, my understanding is that the effective date has to be on the certification of the voter's choice or afterwards. And so in that scenario, the first year that we would be able to go out for a bond or for a loan would be fiscal year 2025. So that does delay it 1 more year from what the current proposal is in terms of when we could go out for a loan. I will say that the Urban Renewal Agency currently has funds available and the city has funds available. So I would want to get started on the project of the Urban Renewal Plan using those resources prior to that first bond or that first loan, so that when that money does come in, we could start construction with shovel-ready projects.
Yeah, so the point you're making is we would begin planning, which we would have to do anyway, immediately. If it was accepted by the community. Got it. Counselor Byers?
Just furthering that point, so should this be accepted by the voters in May, as soon as that vote is certified, we could begin working based on the funds that we already have available. Great.
Sorry. Counselor Postizo and then Eleanor, Counselor Postizo and then Jordan.
Yeah, now that we've sort of made our decision, I've been wondering how often are urban renewal districts, the creation of one, actually put to the voters? Is that common or unusual? I don't really know. I'm just curious.
Elaine?
It's not unusual, but it's also not common. So there are, Corvallis has a vote, Tigard has a vote, Beaverton has a vote. David, can you think of others?
You know, I can't off the top of my head. You know,
There- There are a handful, but not a lot.
Well, does it make any sense to? Does it make any sense to the council? I mean, we could build that into the ordinance at that point in time if we use this time to kind of lay out, the planning and all of the time that it's going to take to get up to the point where we can really start to utilize funds for construction, et cetera. If it's passed, we could also build the sending it to the ballot in the ordinance, right? So it really doesn't have to be built into the resolution. It can just be built into the ordinance if we wanted to wait just to be able to consider any other additional information. And so, I mean, you sort of have your answer, but if anybody wants to reconsider it, I that I would open it up for reconsideration. David, did I see that hand go up?
yeah, just very quickly, Mayor. So the resolution that I think that Jordan is suggesting is really one of intent. And I want to be sure, and if anybody, staff-wise or otherwise disagrees with this, I think it's definitely worth talking about. But the way I view that is simply, this is, as Jordan said, a way to, really get, the council specifically thinking about this. And so it's very clear what, at least as of now, those next steps would be. And that wouldn't at all prevent the council from ultimately making a different decision about how it goes about really any part of the plan. And I think the referral to the voters would also be an element of that. And so, if in the future there were a different take about doing that would be just fine. Nothing you would say in the resolution would limit you in that regard, or sort of changing course. And I also think it's true that ultimately that resolution that the council will adopt, that is adoption of the plan, would spell out in a section of the, did I say resolution? The ordinance that adopts the plan would spell out in a section of the ordinance the referral. It would say basically, something along the lines of staff will, forward this to the county, et cetera, to present it to the voters on the May ballot, 2023. So you just have that as a section in the ordinance itself. I think what you're doing now with the resolution is really just getting that clear intent about what you want to do at this time.
All right.
Hopefully.
Any other comments? Thank you, David. So let's go ahead and bring forward the speaker requests.
And Mayor, I apologize, I misspoke. I was looking at the list of people who signed up for testimony at tomorrow night's meeting. So Hector, I'm going to turn the mic to you if we received any speaker request forms specific to tonight's agenda item.
I have not received any speaker requests specifically for tonight's meeting. However, there are 44 attendees in the audience.
Yeah, we. Is there anybody in the audience? If you wish to speak, you can raise your hand. We have a practice of picking up. So we have somebody with the last name of Pedersen. Please come forward and state your name for the record, and then we have one more. And can I get your full name and city for the record, please? Your mic is on, but no audio. Okay. Hector, do you have any tips or suggestions for, looks like they went back to the audience. So if you have any tips or suggestions for them, great. Otherwise, let's go ahead and bring Courtney Buccolo.
I don't have any tips or suggestions. Perhaps logging out and re-logging in might work, but I don't know what devices other people are on. They could be using an outdated version of Zoom.
Thank you.
So we'll welcome Courtney Buccolo.
And for the last name Pedersen, the person with the name Pedersen, if you log back in, log out, and log back in, I'll wait a little bit for you. We want to hear from people. Okay, Courtney Buccolo, go ahead and bring her in. She's still in the list. Courtney.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, please state your name and city for the record.
My name is Courtney Buccolo. I live at 617 Talent Avenue in Talent. We were fire affected and chose to rebuild in our same location. And I just wanted to say I really appreciated this meeting tonight. I think the consideration you've given to feedback has, I hope, brought down a lot of concerns a lot of people had about, the city council trying to push forward something that people were interested in. And I think you've shown tonight that you're listening to feedback and taking things into consideration. And while I also work daily with fire survivors and wish that we could just move things more quickly to bring people home, as someone who had to bus my own child from Medford for over a year. I'm glad that you're taking into consideration the re-traumatization that is happening with the kind of anti-Tura campaign out there. And I think you're being really thoughtful, and I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. All right, it looks like I thought I saw Pedersen go out and come back in. So let's give Pedersen another try.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, Kristen Pedersen, talent resident. I have personally emailed several of you and no response. The Tura funding, in my view, in my opinion, is a bunch of crap. It's not doing the community any good. It's a complete misuse of funds. You guys have committees to take care of the weed abatement. You guys have the city public works that is supposed to take care of our streets. You want to take funding from our schools that are already struggling? You want to take from 4-H? You want to take from the libraries? Do you recount that the libraries got shut down because there wasn't enough funding? You wanted to, you tried defunding the police department. You want to take a whole bunch of money from the fire department. I mean, really? Like, this is ridiculous. My children are traumatized from the Alameda fire. You guys, these committees can't even keep up and do what they're supposed to do as it is. I had stop signs. I had a police officer ask me what was up with the stop sign on the corner of my street. And I said, I don't know. It's faded. It's old. It needs to be taken care of. I have neighbors that have ivy growing up into their main power box to their house. That's a fire hazard. Do any of you care? No, there's been no response. Nothing. And the way that the Alameda fire was handled in the first place was a bunch of freaking crap. I called the police department and I asked what our evacuation level was because I had the scanner pulled up and they're calling out streets 2 blocks from me. Oh, there's no fire evacuation. So really, we're going to pull from people that keep our community and us safe? Like that's like the most crack pipe freaking dream I've ever heard of in my life. This is just absolutely just mind-blowing and the most retarded thing that I've ever heard in my life. You guys want to come in and take people's property and do this and do that and defund this and defund that. How is that protecting and keeping our community safe?
1
It's
minute,
not.
Kristen.
And I'm sorry, but 2 of you haven't rebuilt, but everybody else has around your houses. And I'm pretty sure you know who you are. Where
One of
is
them's
our
me.
money going? Where is our money going?
Next, we have Derek Manzi.
Thank you. So I just want to remind everybody that, you know, we value even when we don't agree. And we want to hear people's opinions. But we do also want to ask you to be respectful in your comments, and I'll just leave it at that. So please bring forward the next person. Thank you.
Good evening, Derek Manzi, City of Talent.
Thank you.
I think that the discussion tonight has been very, very good so far. The one thing that I do feel that needs to come into the conversation is the conversation around the funding for Jackson County District 5. They submitted quite a lengthy letter, multiple letters actually, and I actually read through all 236 pages of the agenda packet, which I'm sure nobody else had time to do today. And in that, there was a 29-page executive summary that went into extremely deep detail of what the current proposed agenda is not satisfying with regards to the legal satisfactions needed to be approved. And so my concern is, even with postponing to January of 2022, could this potentially result in any further delays should any legal ramifications come from any of these other taxing districts, should we not have enough detail in this plan? So that's my question to the council tonight. You know, have we crossed our T's and dotted our I's on all of this thing? Because we all want this to happen. You know, nobody's opposed to Tura from all the people I've spoken to, but you know, we may have some differing opinions on where the funding is coming from and all that, but we all want this to happen ultimately. So that's just my concern there, based on what the fire district has submitted into the agenda packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters, Mr. Manzi. And, you know, I do try to remind at the beginning of this process that our council rules don't allow us to engage in back and forth question and answering during council meetings. It's, you know, council meetings are reserved for decision-making and deliberation, but we definitely want to hear from our community. So sometimes we'll take it up later in the agenda when we have more flexibility, and that's usually in other business on the agenda. So I just wanted to let you know it's why we don't engage in discussions during citizens heard on agenda item. Okay, so Hector?
Chris Lutz.
Thank you. And also our timer is going, right? Jordan, I saw the 1 minute warning earlier, so it's a 3-minute timer, is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Oh, Chris, please state your name and city for the record.
Chris Luz, Phoenix. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You know, as Derek said, the fire department submitted a huge amount of information today. I was a little bit disappointed that the council never even broached the information that the fire district sent you. They still feel that you're defunding the fire district. I'm sure they'd love to have a date of 1/1/2023 as a frozen tax base date instead of 22. But Mayor Darby, I'd love to have you guys just spend a little bit of time tonight addressing the fire department's concerns. Empathize with them, talk about their concerns for the community, show that you are hearing the fire department. You haven't even mentioned the fire department tonight. Well, you did in a slide, but my goodness, isn't it great if Eleanor and Councilor Clark, Byers, Perry Miller, yourself, and the rest of the councilors can at least address what the fire department's concerns are. Discuss it. Let the community know that you hear them. You don't talk about it. The community is saying, you're not even listening to the fire department tonight. That's my concern. Take a few minutes, guys. Talk about your personal concerns and reflect on what the fire department has said to you. It is so important. And they give it zero amount of time tonight. I don't know, a little bit disturbing. Again, I appreciate your volunteer efforts, everything you guys are doing, but talk about the fire department, empathize a little bit. That's it. Thank you very much.
Are there any other speakers?
There are no additional new speakers, Madam Mayor.
Jordan?
Yeah, for the next step, you know, just to close out this agenda item, is I am going to ask council to make a motion, you know, directing staff to draft a resolution based off the discussion tonight. And I can pull up example language on the screen. But given that council has made a consensus, I also just would like to state something for council and just say I'm really honored for the opportunity to work so much more in depth with this plan and really grateful for the opportunity. So I really look forward to working with all of you, to working with our taxing district partners to actually have sit downs, hopefully, especially with the fire district and the county and the folks that see that more regional perspective, and to work with all of you to see what we can address while still attaining the goals that are so necessary for our rebuild. So I want to say thank you to everyone for the opportunity. I know my staff is looking forward to contributing as well. And with that, I will pull up a potential motion on the screen.
I just want to add, you know, that we're really grateful to have your level of competency on this team and looking forward to what the next evolution of this plan is as it gets. I think it'll get smarter and more efficient and more a greater tool for our community. But just because of some of the comments that were said earlier, I just want to emphasize that you'll have an opportunity to sit with the jurisdictions more not, I mean, we have a lot of outreach. I personally have sat down with the chair of and the chair of the fire department, and we've had discussions. So I don't want to leave the community, the 44 attendees, with the impression that has been that's been a process that we haven't engaged in the past. But I also agree that you having an opportunity to engage in this discussion will be new, and it provides additional hope for a better plan. So thank you. So with that, do you have a potential, I know you had a couple potential motions drafted up for us, given where we're at. Yeah.
So this bottom motion is some potential language.
Are there any questions or comments before I entertain a motion? Seeing none, Councilor Postizo?
Yeah, I was just gonna read the motion if you're ready.
Ready.
I move to amend the plan as discussed in tonight's meeting and direct staff to draft a resolution for council to consider at the August 17th meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend the plan as discussed in tonight's meeting and direct staff to draft a resolution for council to consider at the August 17th meeting. Is there any further discussion? Councilor Clark?
Yeah, just excited to support this motion. Excited to see this council reach this point in the process, and the thoughtful consideration that's been brought to this whole discussion tonight and for the past year or more. I think it's very easy to look at the rebuilding that has occurred and get a false impression of how recovery is going overall. There's a lot of brand new houses in Talent, and most of them are bigger than the ones that were there before. That we should not allow that to cloud our vision or to allow us to not see the families that have not come back, that have not found their pathway back. And some people are living still in very dire straits. Other people have temporarily resettled, but are still looking for that path back to Talent. And I think it's very, it's very easy to not see those who are not here. And we made a commitment after the fire that we weren't going to let that happen, that we were going to keep our focus on providing a pathway back here. And I feel like this plan is consistent with that commitment, is consistent with the values that this council has been advancing in recent years. And I feel like the voters in Talent are, once we have more time to communicate and educate and correct the record, I foresee that this plan being approved and implemented, and I look forward to that. And I'm just happy to be a part of this process and happy to see us get to this point.
Anybody else? I'm just going to add to the conversation that tonight's discussion is the product of really good feedback from all the jurisdictions and some good analytics from our city. And is a demonstration by this council that we do care about the other jurisdictions, that we do empathize, and that we also believe very strongly that there's still a great deal of work to do. And I want to thank again all of the jurisdictions for their input. We recognize that everybody has a different point of view on this, but I think we've heard a lot of from our community and from the other jurisdictions that scaling the plan back would make a difference. And Certainly we know that to be true with the City of Talent based on the really great information that we've already received. And we look forward to collaborating and partnering with the other jurisdictions to help recover all of the things that have been lost. And so I think that was really echoed in the process that you set up for us tonight, and a very organized fashion. And I think it wouldn't be a mistake to believe that we haven't reviewed all of the information or that we haven't read all the letters. I just am grateful for the efficiency of tonight's process. Any other comments? All right, roll call, please.
Councilor Clark,
Yes.
Councilor Panemra,
Yes.
Councilor Greider,
Yeah,
Councilor Pestizo,
Yes.
Councilor Byers,
Yes.
Councilor Parra Miller.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mayor.
Thank you, Hector. All right, the next item on the agenda is written communications. They are attached to your packet. And if there's nothing else from staff, we'll adjourn at 7:55. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.